Is it a crossover MPV or an MPV crossover? Well, whatever the case may be, the Geely Okavango sure looks like a practical high-riding wagon. Now here's the thing, given Geely's track record, we have high expectations for this model. So can they make it 3 for 3? Well, let's get to it. Now before we hit the road, what do we think of the styling? Well, it follows Geely's current design language. So you have the relatively angular lines and that 3-bar grille at the front. Now you put them all together and, well, from the face of it, the Okavango looks pretty imposing. And why wouldn't it be? This thing is well over 4.8 meters long. So to bring out the proportions, might as well make the front end look, well, pretty mean. Now when you go to the side, you have the pronounced fender flares and the shoulder line. And that sort of makes it look like an off-roader, but here's the thing, it's not. Because regardless of what variant you choose of the Okavango, well, they're all two-wheel drive, they're all front-wheel drive, but at least you still have that muscular look going on. But when you go to the rear, well, I think it could use a little bit more detailing because there's not much in the way of, well, style. But here's the thing, it's all about utility when you go at the back because, well, you have that wide tailgate, which should make loading in and out a lot easier. So what we have here is the top-of-the-line urban variant. So you get 18-inch alloys and a roof rail to go along with it. Inside, when it comes to design, it looks similar to other Geely models, but there is a significant difference. The top of the door panels are hard plastic, and the other Geely models like the Azkara and the Coolray, these are soft touch, and so are the ones lower here. But thankfully, the touch points are soft, so that's when you grab this little pocket here and the armrest. Now, I do like this, the floating grab handle, and it makes pulling in the door a lot easier because it is pretty chunky. Now, right in front of me, D-shaped steering wheel, leather wrapped, well, just for that extra premium feel, and of course your controls for the infotainment and the instrument cluster, and that brings me neatly to the display here. Now, from further away, it looks analog, but it is actually fully digital. And not only that, it also has a comprehensive list of displays from your travel time, your average fuel economy, and even your tire pressure monitor system. And of course, dig a little bit deeper, and you'll also change some settings for the display too. You can even change it to miles per hour if you prefer imperial to metric. Moving a little further away from the driver's side, you have this rather interesting shelf. Now, it's pretty shallow, so I'm not exactly sure what you could put there. Perhaps you could put, well, relatively small items just to keep them out of your pocket and all that. So I think this is a nice little touch. Now, the Okavango comes with a high-rise center console, and I think that just makes things a lot easier to reach, from your gear selector, your climate control, and, well, your cup holder and all that. And that also means your armrest is set relatively high, and that's what I like about this. Now, other features, you have 2 USB ports and triple zone climate control, so it's dual for the front and single for the rear. You also have pretty sizable cup holders, and open this and you get a cool box, which is always a plus, especially if you carry drinks around a lot. Now, the electronic gear shift, well, for some people, it might take some time for them to get used to, but, you know, try to use it often enough and, you know, you're gonna get the hang of it. And you also have, of course, your drive mode selectors. You have Eco, Comfort, and Sport. And from here, you can also access your 360-degree camera, but we'll get more on that later. Now, because of the high-rise center console, you also have a massive cubby down here. And I think, well, it's a sort of influence from Volvo, but when you think about it, Geely owns Volvo, so you're probably not surprised to see this feature in just about every model they make. Now the infotainment system, and in some ways it kind of looks like an Android display. I actually kind of like it. And I also have to say that, well, the speeds, it's pretty fast, it's also pretty responsive. Now, of course, this is a rather comprehensive infotainment system, so you have your vehicle settings and all that. And we head back to the main menu. You can also fiddle around the 360-degree camera. And there's even a 3D view just to, well, entertain you a little bit or give you a better view of your surroundings. So simply press 3D and you can change the camera view from here. I can go for the full front view, I can go for like a front 3/4 view and all that. And not only that, you can also change the color of the car that's on display. So right now this car is finished in Luna Silver, but say I want something a little bit different, so I'll choose Diamond Red in this case, and voila, you have a Diamond Red car on the screen. Pretty entertaining. Now head back to the main menu, and what else is there to see? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't come with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Instead, you have something that's called QD Link. But if you don't want to use QD Link, this car does come with auxiliary audio and a Bluetooth system. Now, as you'd expect from a vehicle this long, you'd have a lot of legroom and headroom, and as you can see, I can stretch out quite easily in the second row of the Okavango. Legroom, pretty good, and so is knee room. There's absolute acres of it. And headroom, well, there's a whole handspan of that. Now, the Okavango also comes with individual seats in the second row. That means where I'm sitting, I can slide it forward and back, so can the center seat and the one furthest from me. That also means whoever's sitting here will be very happy because, well, the seat's not raised and all that, so he can get the legroom he wants. Unfortunately, that also means you don't have a center armrest, and your drinks, well, they're relegated to the bottle holders on each of the doors. Now I notice a relative lack of cubby spaces here in the second row, which is a stark contrast to what's in front. There's tons of it in front. However, it does make up for it when it comes to versatility. Now, Geely says there are up to 19 seating configurations. So aside from sliding these forward and back, you can also fold these down. You could also tumble them and whatnot. Now, other things you could find in the third row, you have a pair of storage pockets on each side and as well as a pair of cup holders. But there is one thing missing at the back of the Okavango, and that is a charging port. Now, you don't even get a 12-volt socket here, which means filling up that optional airbed is a bit cumbersome. And if you recall, well, Pablo had a little more quality time with that optional airbed when he did the unboxing for this model. Now for the cargo space, and behind the third row you have about 250 liters, and that's good enough for like an overnight bag. But if you fold the third row down, and it's pretty easy, all you have to do is pull a strap, and same goes for the other side. And you're looking at 1,200 liters of space. And if you fold all the seats down, you have over 2,000 liters. And I have to say, that's even more than some mid-sized truck-based SUVs. How's the Okavango like on the road? Well, like most cars these days, it comes with electronic power steering assist. So that means the steering effort is very light and there's not a lot of feedback that courses through the steering wheel. But then again, this is a family hauler, so I'm not really expecting a lot from that department. Now, that doesn't mean the Okavango handles like a truck. Actually, it's far from it, because it's based on a car rather than a pickup truck. it handles much like a crossover. And it doesn't feel very cumbersome behind the wheel, and actually, in fact, it's pretty maneuverable, which is a surprise considering this car is about 4.8 meters long. It's no small vehicle at all. One thing that does surprise me about the Okavango is how quiet it is in here. It has a good amount of sound deadening, so that keeps out all the outside noise. Although I have to say that you do hear a bit of the tire noise, and those big side mirrors, well, they contribute a bit of wind whistle between the mirror and the window. But other than that, it is a hushed cabin. And that's also thanks in part to the gas hybrid powertrain right up at the front, but we'll get to that later. Now we know how the Okavango drives, but how does it ride? Well, I do admit that you will feel the bumps in this crossover or MPV crossover. But here's the thing, it's not firm or it's not harsh. You will feel them, but in a sort of gentle way. So I could best describe the ride as, well, supple. And it's generally comfortable here. However, do note that what I observed is that when you go over a speed bump at relatively higher speeds, you could hear the front shocks sort of rebound a little too quickly. You're going to hear a thud right at the front, but don't be too worried about it. That's just the suspension reacting to the bump. But again, it's generally comfortable. Now, powering the Okavango is a 1.5 liter 3-cylinder engine, and I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't that a little bit too small to carry around this big of a vehicle? Well, you have to try it out first, because that little engine is turbocharged and it's good for 190 horsepower and 300 newton meters of torque. And those are figures we wouldn't call underpowered. Now, how does it pull like? Well, it's pretty smooth and refined, and you can barely hear the engine working. And what's even more amusing is, even if we head uphill, it doesn't feel strained, even if you're trying to overtake. That's how smooth that engine is. And speaking of other things that are smooth, I have to commend the dual clutch transmission. Now, dual clutch transmissions tend to be a little bit jerky for some people, but not in the case of the Okavango. So the engine does deliver the goods, but what about fuel economy? So despite having 190 horsepower and 300 newton meters of torque, fuel economy is, well, pretty decent. Now, around the city, I'm doing 8.8 kilometers per liter, and some would say that's a little bit thirsty for a 1.5 liter with just 3 cylinders. But here's the thing, it's lugging a lot of weight. And considering the capability of this vehicle, 8.8 kilometers per liter is pretty good. Actually, really commendable. But let's say you often take the Okavango out on the highway. Well, you're looking at figures of about 15 kilometers per liter. And let's say it's a mix of both city and touring and a bit of highway. I saw figures of about 12 to 13 kilometers per liter. So in some ways, it consumes a little bit like a diesel, but without the vibration or the harshness. So what do we think of the Okavango? Well, I have to say, after trying it out and looking at the prices, it presents a pretty good value proposition too. Now, the entry-level comfort variant starts at 1,208,000 pesos, while this urban variant starts at 1,328,000. Now, some of you are thinking that's a lot of cash to shell out. But here's the thing. It's more affordable than similarly sized vehicles, and it has a lot more standard equipment, not to mention loads of room inside. So yes, I have to say that Geely is 3 for 3 so far, with the impressive Coolray and Ascara, and we can add the Okavango to the list. But one question still remains. Is it a crossover MPV or an MPV crossover? Well, we'll leave that up to you guys to decide. Now, this has been Anton Andres from AutoIndustriya.com. If you enjoyed this review, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. And while you're at it, like us on Facebook as well. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching.